He had all the smoke in front of y'all, though.
Capricorn Clark leaves court after testifying against her one-time boss, Sean Combs, after detailing how she claimed she was kidnapped, threatened with murder, and witnessed beatings of Cassie Ventura. I go through 13 explosive moments from Clark's testimony and how Combs' longtime rival Suge Knight and later 50 Cent and Jay-Z came up. Welcome to Crime Fix. I'm Angenette Levy. Capricorn Clark worked for Sean Combs for years, and the stories she told the jury sound like something out of a mafia movie. Clark was on the stand for the entire day to kick off the third week of Sean Combs' sex trafficking and racketeering conspiracy trial. Combs has pleaded not guilty to all of those charges, and he maintains he's innocent. He's also charged with transportation for purposes of prostitution, and he says he's not guilty of that, too. Now, Capricorn Clark is just one of a number of employees of Combs to testify. She was close to Combs and Cassie Ventura, and she saw a lot, and she went through a lot. Capricorn Clark's name had come up earlier in the trial. In fact, Kid Cudi testified it was Clark who called him in December of 2011 and told him that she was with Sean Combs and that Combs had broken into his house with one of his security people. Clark told the jury about that day. She said she was kidnapped, taken by Combs to Kid Cudi's home against her will, and Combs was armed. Now, under cross-examination by Combs' attorney, Mark Agnifilo, Clark got some digs in at Cassie, and the defense scored some points. I'll get into that later. But let's start at the very beginning. Capricorn Clark said she first met Sean Combs in 2002, and she said she and Combs were super platonic friends. Then in 2004, she started working as his personal assistant. And like other employees before her, Clark said working for Sean Combs was not easy. In fact, on her first day of work, Capricorn Clark said that Sean Combs made a threat to her involving murder. Clark told the jury that Combs and one of his security guys, Uncle Paulie, took her to Central Park at 9 p.m. and questioned her about working for Suge Knight, the former CEO of Death Row Records. Clark had worked for Knight, who's now serving a 28-year sentence for manslaughter in California. Clark testified that Combs, quote, told me that he didn't know that I had anything to do with Suge Knight and that if anything happened, he would have to kill me. Clark said Combs was calm and she thought he was very serious because she felt there was some gravitas to the fact that he had had issues with Suge. Those were her words. Clark said that was just the very beginning. When this was happening, Clark said that Uncle Paulie was nearby and he was stoic. Despite the threat, Clark said she continued to work for Sean Combs because she felt she could have been more transparent about her work history with Suge Knight. Seriously. When asked, Clark also detailed how she heard Sean Combs talk about guns. Once it happened when she was his personal assistant. During her first stint working for Combs, they were at MTV doing press, and Clark said Combs told 50 Cent's manager in the elevator that he was having an issue with him, but he didn't like all of the back and forth. Clark said Combs said, "I like guns." And when he said that, he was very serious. Clark said after she'd been working for Combs for a couple of months, she was accused of stealing from him. Clark testified, "I was accused of stealing 3 pieces of very high-end jewelry that was out on loan from Jacob the jeweler. There was a diamond necklace with a cross, a diamond bracelet, and a diamond watch." She was asked by the assistant U.S. attorney, "Ms. Clark, had you stolen the jewelry?" Clark said, "I did not." She was asked, "Was there a time when the jewelry came into your possession?" Clark said, "Yes." She was asked, "Why did it come into your possession?" Clark said, "Puff gave it to me." She was asked, "Did he give it to you for safekeeping?" Clark said, "He gave it to me to take on the plane trip that we had that afternoon to Miami." Now, the jewelry was on loan to Sean Combs, and Clark said she called the Bad Boy Records office and had it locked down and told security to search everybody. Then Uncle Paulie went with her to her house, and she said he questioned her for a couple of hours and searched her home. The next day, Clark said Uncle Paulie picked her up and took her to a dilapidated building that would later become Bad Boy Worldwide's future headquarters. Clark said Uncle Paulie took her to the 6th floor, to an unfinished floor. Another large man was there, chain-smoking cigarettes. Clark testified, he says I had been brought to the building to take a lie detector test to figure out what happened with this jewelry. Clark was asked, what, if anything, did he say would happen if you did not pass the test? Clark testified, he said if you fail these tests, they're going to throw you in the East River. Can you believe that? Combs' lawyer, Mark Agnifilo, objected, but he lost this round. Clark said the man was very serious, very direct, and no frills, and she was petrified. Our content shows just how important personal safety is, and that's especially true when it comes to protecting your privacy online. You would be absolutely shocked at how much of your personal information is out there, like your address and your phone number. Ever wonder why you get so many spam calls and emails? That's because this information is all public. That's where our sponsor, Incogni, comes in. It's a service that helps you take control of your online privacy by removing your personal data from data brokers. Those are huge companies that sell and trade your info without your permission. Incogni actually found more than 50 brokers with my information, and here's the kicker. These data brokers have to remove you from their database if you ask them to. Now, you're probably thinking, Angenette, who in the heck has time to contact a data broker? Well, that again is where Incogni comes in. They contact those companies for you to get your online safety back. You don't have to do a thing, and then they alert you after the request has been completed. After signing up, I get virtually no spam, so I highly recommend giving Incogni a try. Right now, anyone who uses the code CRIMEFIX at incogni.com/crimefix gets 60% off. That's code CRIMEFIX at incogni.com/crimefix for 60% off an annual Incogni plan. Clark said she allowed the man to conduct the lie detector test. Clark testified, I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't pass this test, and I felt the test was the only way to get through this thing. She was asked, can you describe how the test is administered? Clark said, they strap some stuff to your chest and they strap some stuff to your arms, and they ask you a series of questions over and over again. She was asked, what types of questions were you asked? Clark said, did I steal the jewelry? Did I come up with an idea to steal the jewelry? Did I plan with somebody to steal the jewelry? Had I ever stolen from him? Just a lot of stealing-centric questions. Clark was then asked, from him, was that Mr. Combs? Clark said yes. She was then asked, did this man tell you the results of the test? Clark said, they said they were inconclusive. She was then asked, what, if anything, did the man tell you about them, the results being inconclusive? Clark said, it's like, I'm not getting a good reading. You need to calm down. You're going to be in the East River if I can't get a reading on this. Clark was asked, when he told you to calm down, how had you been reacting in that moment? Clark responded, I couldn't calm down. I wasn't doing a good job at calming down. Clark said she was with the men for a full workday, and the test was administered intermittently throughout the day. And it didn't go on for just one day. This went on for 5 days. Each day, Clark testified Uncle Paulie would pick her up and take her back to the 6th floor of the building, and the lie detector test would continue. Clark said she didn't like the threats about being tossed in the East River, and she wanted to prove her innocence. Eventually, Clark said she returned to work, and she was never told whether the jewelry was found, and her boss, Sean Combs, never asked where she had been. Capricorn Clark said working for Sean Combs was hard. Workdays were typically 9 a.m. to 4 a.m. The day would start at his home, getting him a carnation for his suit, printing out documents, researching something he had on his mind, roll calls, and getting him food. Basically anything that needed to be done. And if you didn't get it done, you would lose your job. And Combs let his employees know that, according to Clark. She said she didn't get breaks to eat, and on a good night, she'd get 4 hours of sleep. On a bad night, 2. Now, things got so bad from stress, Clark said she developed alopecia, and that's a condition where you actually lose your hair. It just falls out of your head. Clark said she was making $65,000 per year, and she went to HR, and overtime pay was calculated for 3 months. Clark said HR determined she was owed $80,000, and when Combs saw that on a piece of paper, he simply ripped it up. Clark also booked hotel rooms and set them up for Sean Combs and Kim Porter. She said Combs traveled with a camera box. It had a small camera, a small bottle of baby oil, and a bottle of lube. She also packed his Louis Vuitton toiletry bag, which had ecstasy in it. These hotel stays would last for 4 days. Clark stopped working for Combs for a short time, but then returned in 2008. She got a promotion working as his brand ambassador. Now, by that time, Clark said that Combs and Cassie had actually started getting IV drips. I asked, he related it similar to serotonin supplements because ecstasy depletes your serotonin. It's just replenishing us from partying over the weekend. Clark was asked, from the drugs? She answered yes. Clark also testified about how Sean Combs described his relationship with Cassie Ventura. She described a time in 2010 when Combs called Cassie into his kitchen and told her, grab this, grab that, hand me that, turn around. You get the drift. Clark said Cassie Ventura followed each and every instruction. Then Combs said, did you see that? He said, you B words won't do that. That's why you don't have a man. To which we said, you mother effing right. Clark said she saw Combs use drugs, including Molly, and during her time working for him, he also used prescription drugs, and she testified that she actually bought them for him at times. And when they were in France, he wanted cocaine. Clark said she didn't want to buy the cocaine because that's how her mother had passed away, so she had some Spanish security guards buy it for him. And get this, Clark said she would actually get prescription drugs for Sean Combs in Miami under her own name when he exceeded the amount he could get for himself in Miami Beach. Clark also told the jury that Sean Combs would sometimes come back from Europe with 100,000 euros in cash from overseas bookings, and that money would always go in the safe in his house. Then in 2006, she said Sean Combs got violent with her at his home in Miami, charging her and pushing her when she said, I hate it here, after the chef told her they were out of turkey bacon, and the chef told Combs what she had said. Now, after this incident, Capricorn Clark left her job with Sean Combs, but then came back in 2011. Clark was Cassie Ventura's manager at that point, but not working directly with Sean Combs. But Combs had approval, she said, over everything having to do with Cassie, her schedule, her hair, her makeup, everything. Then the testimony turned to December of 2011 and Kid Cudi. Cassie Ventura was dating Kid Cudi in 2011, and she said one day, Cassie wanted to bring him along on a hike. And Clark said she told Cassie via text that was a bad idea and she needed to delete that text. The text was on a Bad Boy Records issued phone, and Capricorn Clark was concerned about Sean Combs finding out. So Capricorn Clark said she bought Cassie a burner phone because, quote, the way she was moving, she was going to get us all killed. That drew an objection, which was sustained. Next, Capricorn Clark moved to the early morning of December 22nd, 2011. She testified she awoke to Sean Combs banging on her door with what sounded like metal. Clark said she opened her door and Combs had a gun in his hand, and he walked in and said, why didn't you tell me? Then he said, get dressed. We are going to kill this N-word. Clark said she told Sean Combs she didn't want to go, and he responded, I don't give an F-word. What you want to do, go get dressed. At this point, she testified the gun was in his waistband. Clark said she didn't try to escape because he was livid and, quote, I had never seen anything like this before. He had never come to my house, and the entire time I had known him. I've never seen him with a weapon. I've never seen him making me do something like this. Clark said she didn't have a choice, and they went in a black SUV to Kid Cudi's house. And when they got there, Clark said Combs and his security guy, Ruben, went to the house, and she called Cassie Ventura on her burner phone. Then Kid Cudi showed up, and Clark said they started chasing Kid Cudi in the car. Cudi eventually lost them, and they even passed police along the way. Now, this day ended when Combs demanded Capricorn Clark bring Cassie to him and convince Kid Cudi to not involve the police. Clark said she picked up Cassie Ventura and drove her to Sean Combs' house, and he kicked her to the ground and continued kicking her all the way to the street. Clark said she walked home and called Cassie's mother to get help for her. Now, this was followed, Clark said, by the email from Cassie where she said Sean Combs was threatening to release sex tapes of her and to hurt Kid Cudi. Months later, Clark said she was contacted by an arson investigator because Kid Cudi had given him her name about his car, but she hung up. Months later, she was fired from Bad Boy while on vacation and eventually reached a settlement. It came out during a sidebar that settlement was $500,000. Then came the cross-examination, and it began with Capricorn Clark admitting that she had actually wanted to return to work for Sean Combs, and she testified that she had told Combs' lawyers last year that she didn't believe Cassie was good for Combs. Clark said, I thought they were toxic as a couple, and Combs' lawyer, Mark Agnifilo, set out to score some points on cross, pointing out that Clark might have an axe to grind. Agnifilo pointed to a text that Capricorn Clark sent to Combs in which she said she had had the biggest crush on him before she started working for him. This was in June of 2021, long after Capricorn Clark's employment with Combs ended. There were several times she had reached out to him. She said she wanted her life back, to work in the music industry. And Agnifilo got Clark to admit she brought up working for Combs again to him as recently as last year. Agnifilo also questioned Clark about the lie detector test she said she was forced to take over 5 days in 2004. Agnifilo asked, okay, what time did you get unhooked up and what time did you get unhooked? Clark said, a regular getting off time, 5, 6. Agnifilo asked, and you were hooked up the whole time? Clark said, I wasn't hooked up the whole time. I would take the test. He would unhook me. We would review it. We would do it again. Agnifilo said, okay, so how many individual lie detector tests did you get? Clark said, I didn't count, but I know I kept doing it every day. Agnifilo asked, all right, and who did you complain to? Anybody about the lie detector test? Clark said, Paul, but no one else. Agnifilo pointed out that Clark did not report this incident to anyone, and a couple of months after that, she was fired, and she still sounds bitter. Agnifilo asked, and what were you fired for? Clark said, over his girlfriend at the time, Erica Hugh. Agnifilo asked, so you got fired over another girlfriend? Clark answered, yes. Agnifilo asked, and then how long were you not working for the company? Clark answered, like 3 or 4 weeks. Agnifilo asked, 3 or 4 weeks? Capricorn Clark responded, yeah. But that only lasted until Combs' birthday, when he ran into an issue with some party planning. Agnifilo asked, and then after 3 or 4 weeks, how did you get unfired? Clark said, I was happy to be fired. I was getting rest. I rested for the 3 weeks. I got a call from Norma Augenblick. It was time to do the 35th birthday party at Cipriani. Norma's stipulation was, if she was going to work on the party, was, I'm not doing this party unless Capricorn is doing the celebrity guest list. She and he called and said, look, will you come back to do the celebrity list for Puff's birthday at Cipriani? We will pay you. Okay, I'll come do the celebrity list. And that's how I came back. Agnifilo tried to also cast doubt on Clark's claim that she was kidnapped during that trip to Kid Cudi's house in December of 2011, pointing out that she passed police later that day on her way to Cudi's house and never told an officer that she had been taken at gunpoint. Now, at times, Clark became emotional on the stand. She testified that she learned a lot from Sean Combs. Clark said, he knows how to execute. He is tenacious. He wanted to break the glass ceiling as it related to what we were allowed to do as Black people in the business world. And that was, it helped when you're working so hard to be working with somebody who would match wits with you on the fervor to be successful. Clark said, it was complicated. Agnifilo also questioned Clark about Cassie and how she didn't always get along with her. Clark said Ventura got more bravado after 2008, that she went from being a model to a feisty girlfriend. And she said she felt Cassie was beautiful and had talent, but was someone who needed help in the studio. She wasn't a live performer like a Mariah Carey or a Whitney Houston. So that was kind of one of those digs that I was referring to earlier. Clark said, I have good taste. Clark told the jury that Sean Combs did what Cassie wanted, and she claimed Cassie wanted her gone and that hurt. Clark said her job was her entire life. She doesn't have parents and her son has autism, so the stakes were higher for her. On redirect, Clark was asked whether Combs actually had that gun during the trip to Kid Cudi's house in 2011, and she said, yes, he did. Clark said she was blacklisted in the music industry by Combs, who was supposed to give her a recommendation. And she claimed music industry heavyweight Jimmy Iovine told her to leave Puff alone or it wouldn't end well for her. But then on recross, Mark Agnifilo asked Clark about a meeting she had with him last year. Clark said it was true, that she recalled a conversation with Cassie in which Clark told Cassie she could date other people and leave Combs. She said Cassie responded that Jay-Z was taken. Who else would she date? So let's bring in Nima Rahmani. He is a former federal prosecutor, also an entertainment lawyer. What are your thoughts, Nima, on Capricorn Clark's testimony? This is somebody who was there during this whole Kid Cudi thing where Sean Combs said, we're going over to the house right now. She's in the car with Sean Combs. So she corroborates that part of Kid Cudi's testimony, but there was a lot more.
Mind blown, Angenette. And we were texting while she was testifying.
Yeah.
And that's really the only emoji I can think of. Look, I mean, she had a lot to say. Now, I do think the defense scored some points, and I'm sure we're going to talk about that. But here's someone that really laid out the entire Kid Cudi scene, right? The jealousy, the fact that Combs broke into Kid Cudi's home. Clark calling Cassie Ventura on a burner phone, warning her and Kid Cudi not to come there, otherwise they might get killed, as well as her own abuse that she suffered and she talked about as well. So really mind-blowing stuff. Certainly the most colorful of the three EAs, the executive assistants to testify so far, after David James and George Kaplan.
You know, this is somebody who goes way back with Sean Combs. She worked for him on two separate occasions. First met him in 2002. Then she left and came back, and he was like, well, you don't have to work directly for me. And she was managing, you know, Sean Combs's image. She's managing Cassie's kind of image and things like that. But she describes some scary stuff. So let's talk about that and how this plays into potentially the racketeering part of this. And I'm not sure this part does, but it's a threat, obviously. But Sean Combs, you know, found out she worked for his arch nemesis, Suge Knight, at Death Row Records. And he didn't like that. And he had something to say about it. So does that fit the bill under RICO for, you know, basically, you know, a pattern, you know, making threats, things like that?
I don't think that specific threat. And like you said, I mean, this is really day one of her employment, right? Combs takes her to the park with his security guard, and he's upset because apparently she didn't tell him that she worked for Death Row Records and Suge Knight. And he threatens to essentially kill her. Now, probably not enough to be a RICO predicate act, but there's certainly some actions later, including after the Kid Cudi episode where he takes her to a nightclub, won't let her go. That can certainly be kidnapping, as well as obviously the 2016 hotel incident where Combs is dragging Cassie Ventura. That could also be kidnapping. I think the kidnapping charges are important, as well as the arson charge. Not the charge, but the conduct, because they can be RICO predicate acts in a way that allows the government to get to racketeering, even if they can't prove sex trafficking. Even the jurors believe that Cassie knowingly and voluntarily and willfully participated in the freak-offs and that it was all consensual. I don't think they're going to be able to argue against the kidnapping and the arson and some of these other predicate acts. So it allows the government to get there even if they can't prove the trafficking.
And Capricorn Clark was asked straight up, have you ever been kidnapped? And she said, well, yes, I was. And she describes this whole thing about being taken to Kid Cudi's house by Sean Combs, and he's got guns, and they're in this Cadillac Escalade. And I mean, Nima, it sounds like something out of some type of like movie. This does not sound like real life. Yes, art imitates life, but this is nuts.
It really is. And it's also important because people are saying that are watching, well, you know, racketeering, you know, this is really overkill. This is overreach. The government's overcharging. Well, not necessarily. If you have an enterprise and Combs is the head of the enterprise and he's calling the shots, right? Hey, hook this person up to a lie detector test. Hey, bomb or Molotov cocktail this person's car, or we're going to look for Suge Knight, or, you know, I don't like 50 Cent and I got guns, or I certainly don't like Kid Cudi because he's dating my girlfriend or my ex-girlfriend. I'm going into his house, right? And look, he's making threats against Kid Cudi. He's acting out on those threats, right? This is really not too different than a mob case that you typically see racketeering charged.
And it does kind of, what she is laying out kind of sounds like that. You know, eventually, you know, she's talking about witnessing the, you know, Cassie Ventura being beaten up by Sean Combs. She said, it hurt to watch this. Regina Ventura wanted her to intervene. She had called Regina Ventura. Sean Combs basically said, I'm going to F you up if you get in the middle of this. You know, there's a lot here. You talked about the lie detector. She was hooked up to the lie detector because they thought she stole some jewelry at a white party, and they said basically if she failed it, she would get thrown in the East River. I mean, they're threats of murder. I mean, this is just insane. So, you know, but on cross-examination,
Mark Agnifilo was able to point out that she may be somebody who is a little jealous of Cassie. You know, there were some digs taken at Cassie, and also she felt like she was a protector of Sean Combs. She talked about him breaking the glass ceiling for Black people. She said this was complicated.
Yeah, and definitely Agnifilo scored points. I mean, taking one step back, like you said, we talked about Regina Ventura, another RICO predicate act, extortion, right?
Yes.
Going back to Flores, the first witness, bribery, right? I mean, so these are all potential ways to get to racketeering. But let's talk about Agnifilo. He's obviously the lead defense lawyer, one of the best, and he scored a lot of points on cross-examination. Look, now here's someone in Clark who has filed 2 lawsuits against Combs, right? She settled the first one, the employment case, after she was terminated. Then she came back, and now she's filed her own civil lawsuit, one of the approximately 100 or so people who have civil claims against Combs. So she could potentially be someone with an axe to grind, a disgruntled employee. Here's someone who on cross admitted that she had a crush on Combs. Here's someone who said on cross that she didn't think Cassie was good for Combs, and that if Combs had kept her on board, he wouldn't even be in this mess, right? Here's someone that at least in August of last year tried to rejoin Combs and Bad Boy as his chief of staff. So certainly a mixed bag when it comes to Clark. I'm not saying that her testimony, can't be trusted or, she's lying, but she does have these different biases that if you're the government, you certainly don't love. But I think what you would argue is, look, here's someone that's telling a story that's consistent with all the other witnesses. And even though the first executive assistant, James, didn't see the violence, Kaplan certainly did. And he resigned as a result of the violence. Now you have Clark really corroborating the different accounts that we've already heard of, Cassie and Kid Cudi. And what I like to do, or I like to do when I was a prosecutor, even now as a civil plaintiff's lawyer, when I have witnesses like this that might be certainly not the best witnesses, I do like to sandwich them in between the very, very good witnesses. So this is that middle part of the case, right? We're now in week 3 of what is likely going to be a 5-week portion of the case as far as the government's case in chief. So we are going to see witnesses like this that, there may be holes in their testimony and they may have potential biases, but again, their story is consistent with other witnesses, and that's why you put them here if you're the government.
Well, it was certainly interesting to watch, and it will be interesting at least to watch and read as far as the tweets and the reports go and the transcripts go. We, of course, don't have cameras in federal court, but it's really been something. Scary stuff. Nima Rahmani, thank you so much.
Thanks, Angenette. Talk to you soon.
And that's it for this episode of Crime Fix. I'm Angenette Levy. Thanks so much for being with me. I'll see you back here next time.